Saturday mornings in the 1970s promised rocket-fueled imagination, yet not every cartoon crossed the finish line. Today, we're counting down 20 forgotten shows that launched with big hype and landed with tiny footprints. Expect studio gambles, creative compromises, and a broadcast landscape shaped by watchdogs and network mandates. Ready to rediscover the flops that time quietly shelved? Let's roll right now. The Roman Holidays, 1972. Imagine the Flintstones, but swap the Stone Age for marble columns and togas. That was the elevator pitch for The Roman Holidays, a family sitcom set in ancient Rome with modern suburban problems. On paper, it had the reliable Hanna-Barbera formula: a hard-working dad, a wisecracking household, and a theme song designed to stick. In practice, the show struggled to justify its own premise. The historical gags, traffic jams with chariots, apartments with aqueduct plumbing, amphitheater sports as neighborhood pastimes, felt like reheated puns from Bedrock and Orbit City. Kids sensed déjà vu. Parents did too. Behind the scenes, the early 70s climate made comedy surprisingly hard. Under pressure from advocacy groups and network standards and practices, writers kept peril soft and slapstick gentler, which left stories feeling weightless. Without sharper conflict or memorable breakout characters, the series couldn't build momentum. Scheduling didn't help. It was tossed into a crowded Saturday morning scrum where any newcomer had seconds to hook channel-hopping viewers. Controversy came less from outrage and more from indifference. Critics tagged it derivative, an echo, rather than an evolution of Hanna-Barbera's family sitcom template. That label stuck. Reruns were sparse. Merchandise never took off beyond a few promo items. Culturally, the show's biggest footprint may be as a cautionary memo inside kids' TV. A clever backdrop isn't a substitute for pulse or point of view. Still, The Roman Holidays is a fascinating time capsule, proof that even top studios can misjudge the gap between concept and connection. Every so often, a clip resurfaces online and commenters marvel at the lavish background art and peppy title sequence. Then they admit why it faded. In an era exploding with space adventures and mystery solvers, a Flintstones in Rome felt like a museum exhibit, polished, pleasant, and strangely still. Help! It's the Hair Bear Bunch, 1971 to 72. Three counterculture-coded bears run elaborate heists to escape a groovy Wonderland zoo, always outfoxing a sputtering zookeeper. That's Hair Bear Bunch in a honeycomb, antic, chatty, and packed with jazzy musical stings. The show's hook was its attitude, a wink at youth rebellion filtered through Hanna-Barbera gag mechanics. But attitude without emotional stakes can be a trap. Episodes reset so neatly that victories felt weightless. Kids laughed at Hair, Square, and Booby's banter, then moved on. The broader context mattered. Early 70s children's TV was under a microscope. Watchdog groups argued for less violence and clearer pro-social lessons. That meant plots that avoided consequences, capers that never hurt, and authority figures who were blustery but harmless. Ironically, the very constraints that made the series safe also shaved off edge. The Bears' Freedom Rider energy bumped into standards and practices at every turn. Catchphrases replaced teeth. Chase scenes traded in speed for silliness. Real risk evaporated. Reception was mixed. Some critics praised the animation's bounce and the pop art color palette. Others called it noisy and shapeless. Ratings never coalesced, and the single-season order quietly ended. Culturally, the show survives as a cult curio, screenshotted for its psychedelic signage and remembered by a sliver of viewers who were exactly the right age to imprint on its musical swagger. Reruns were sporadic, and toy aisles never truly welcomed the trio. Yet Hair Bear Bunch left a faint ring in Saturday morning history. It's an early attempt to channel the campus-era mood, rebellion, slang, and a soft poke at officialdom into kid comedy rhythms. If later series found ways to blend rule-breaking with heart, they also learned from Hair Bear's limits. The Bears were slick escape artists. The show, sadly, couldn't escape a shrug. The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan, 1972. On the surface, The Amazing Chan and the Chan Clan had a flexible blueprint. A big family band that solves mysteries under the steady guidance of their famous detective father. The animation is bright, the mystery of the week's structure is reliable, and the ensemble format offers built-in variety. Yet the series collided with a cultural tide it couldn't outrun. As the 1970s progressed, TV grew more self-aware about portrayals that leaned on caricature. The show's presentation, voices, mannerisms, and Oriental detective trappings read as dated even then, and later audiences found the approach awkward. Production turbulence didn't help. Mid-season tweaks to character voices and music cues suggest the team was searching for a tone that appealed to kids without feeling creaky to adults. Standards and practices also kept the mystery strictly non-threatening. Weapons became props, chases were tame, and villains rarely felt menacing. Kids who craved the crackle of danger gravitated to other sleuth squads. While there was no headline-grabbing ban, sensitivity concerns would shadow reruns for years, limiting how often stations brought it back. That scarcity itself turned the show into a kind of phantom, half-remembered, seldom streamed, living on bootleg clips and nostalgic listicles. Culturally, the most interesting thing about Chan Clan today is what it reveals about an industry mid-pivot. Children's TV was learning, sometimes clumsily, how to avoid stereotypes while still delivering a globe-trotting mystery fantasy. The show's failure was instructive. Diversity can't be a varnish on a stock template. It has to live in the writing, the casting, and the character point of view. As a flop, it's strangely valuable, an artifact of evolving standards, creative uncertainty, and the limits of copy-paste formulas in a changing media world. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, 1973. Take a hot teen band, add spy gear, sprinkle weekly missions, and you've got Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, a title that rode the name recognition of a blockbuster western while sharing little DNA with it beyond branding. The series tried to fuse pop music, light espionage, and comic banter into a single Saturday morning package. None of those components were disastrous. Together, they were faint. The jokes didn't pop, the songs rarely stuck, and the mission plots felt like diet spy fantasies without gadget awe or narrative snap. There were bigger headwinds. The early 70s were jammed with mystery bands and sleuth squads, and viewers could sniff out a formula quickly. Unveil a case, chase clues, corner the baddie, and reset. Under network caution, peril had to be mild. Under musical ambitions, stories paused for numbers that didn't always advance plot. The dual mandate, be a band show and a caper show, left both halves underfed. Any controversies were mainly branding whiplash. Parents familiar with the acclaimed film raised eyebrows at the borrowed outlaw names slapped onto bubblegum adventurers. It wasn't offensive, it was dissonant. That mismatch probably kneecapped word of mouth among adults who otherwise might have stuck around with their kids. Culturally, Butch Cassidy feels like a pre-MTV curiosity, a rehearsal for cartoon pop acts that would later find better synergy between music and story. Its brief run meant little merchandising and a thin rerun life, turning it into the kind of show people remember as a vibe. Matching outfits, a van, a mission briefing, rather than for specific episodes. As flops go, it's a polite one, attractively designed, never egregious, and instantly outcompeted by louder, sharper shows playing the same game. Goober and the Ghostchasers, 1973. If you recognize a faint aroma of Scooby snacks here, you're not wrong. Goober and the Ghostchasers was another teen and dog paranormal romp, this time with a cowardly hound who turned invisible whenever spooked. An amusing twist that couldn't carry a series. The cases were boilerplate, the reveals pedestrian, and the gags leaned on repetition. Goober panics, chaos erupts, the culprit is cornered, cue the tag. The problem wasn't craft so much as context. By 1973, Saturday mornings were saturated with copycat sleuth crews. The monster is really a crook structure once addictive, was becoming a rut. Under pressure from advocacy groups, the networks kept the hauntings strictly fake or safely defanged. That stripped the supernatural of mystery. And older kids, sensing the stakes were always rubber, tuned out. Cameo gimmicks and crossover flavor couldn't compensate for plotting that seldom surprised. There were no headline controversies, just the soft buzz of fatigue. Critics knocked the show for arriving late to a trend it couldn't refresh, and ratings reflected that skepticism. Reruns flickered here and there, but without a breakout episode or a toy line, Goober didn't plant roots. Culturally, it's a neat footnote for the invisibility gag, which animators use to stage tumbling props and floating hats, a reliable laugh for the littlest viewers. Beyond that, the series functions as a cautionary tale. In a crowded era of interchangeable mystery teams, a single gimmick, no matter how visually fun, won't save you. If there's a legacy, it lives in the craft lessons future shows applied. Vary the mystery engine, escalate stakes, and make the fearful friend more than a panic button. Goober, sweet as he is, proved that charm plus invisibility still isn't a roadmap to staying power. The Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show, 1971–72. When the Flintstones wrapped its original run, Hanna-Barbera faced the eternal question, how do you keep Bedrock relevant? Their answer was to age up Fred and Wilma's daughter and Barney and Betty's son into teenagers forming a rock band. The Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show was born with high expectations. On paper, it seemed like a win. Blend the safety of familiar Flintstone DNA with the teen-centric trends dominating Saturday mornings. Yet, the show never captured the magic of its predecessor. The issues began with identity. Audiences tuned in expecting the prehistoric charm of Fred's antics and Stone Age puns. Instead, they got plots about high school crushes, garage band gigs, and light mysteries that could have taken place in any suburban setting. The prehistoric flair became set dressing rather than a living character in the narrative. For longtime fans, it felt disconnected. For kids meeting Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm fresh, the duo didn't stand out against a sea of other teen mystery solvers and pop groups. Critics dismissed the show as a forced extension of the franchise, repurposing the Flintstones' familiar template without its comedic rhythm. Behind the scenes, networks were navigating advocacy group scrutiny, so slapstick was softened and parental figures often faded into the background. Without the grumpy magnetism of Fred or the sweetness of Wilma, Bedrock seemed oddly hollow. Ratings sagged after one season, and executives quickly folded the characters back into ensemble Flintstone Comedy Hour packages. Culturally, Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm remains a reminder that even beloved franchises can overestimate spin-off appeal. The catchy opening theme survived in memory, but the show left little merchandising trail and vanished from reruns quickly. In today's nostalgia corners, fans revisit it out of curiosity rather than affection. Its flop status isn't rooted in scandal, but in the cruel truth of animation. Sometimes even the most familiar names can't save a show that lacks its own beating heart. Speed Buggy, 1973. By the early 70s, Hanna-Barbera was chasing hits by iterating on its most bankable formula. Teen friends, plus a gimmicky sidekick, solving mysteries. Speed Buggy took the mold and gave it an anthropomorphic dune buggy as the comic relief. The premise had flashes of fun, a high-spirited car with a stutter zooming through adventures, but it came across as Scooby-Doo with a chassis. For audiences already saturated with sleuth squads, the novelty wore thin fast. The show's biggest drawback was its mechanical sameness. Each episode followed a near-identical rhythm. The trio plus Speed Buggy stumble onto trouble. The villain executes a thinly plotted scheme, and Speedy saves the day with comedic blunders. While the invisible dog trick in Goober and the Ghostchasers at least offered visual gag variety, Speed Buggy's quirks became repetitive. Kids could predict every gear shift before it happened. Criticism also stemmed from the way Speed Buggy himself was voiced and portrayed. While not offensive, his exaggerated speech patterns risked alienating some viewers. Unlike Scooby, whose bumbling speech radiated charm, Speed Buggy's stutter was sometimes played as the whole joke. That limited how deeply kids could bond with him beyond the surface gag. Behind the scenes, standards and practices still clipped narrative tension, ensuring that all villain plots felt tame. In a decade where kids were starting to gravitate toward edgier live-action sci-fi and superhero shows, a tame dune buggy fell flat. Despite the flop status, Speed Buggy did survive in rerun packages and even popped up in crossovers, including later cameos in Scooby-Doo specials. That small endurance gave it a cult echo, but not mainstream love. Culturally, it's a curiosity, proof that brand cloning rarely equals brand strength. Speed Buggy sputtered out not because it was unwatchable, but because it never gave viewers a reason to keep tuning in when sharper, cooler rides were idling just a dial away. Devlin, 1974. At a glance, Devlin seemed like an attempt to capitalize on Evel Knievel mania. Centering on a young stunt motorcyclist, Ernie Devlin, and his siblings who travel the carnival circuit, the show promised daring stunts, family drama, and lessons wrapped in spectacle. Hanna-Barbera pitched it as an adventurous but wholesome alternative to the thrill-seeking craze sweeping America. Yet what hit the screen was watered down by Saturday morning restrictions. Instead of daring jumps and genuine peril, kids got safe tumbles, moral speeches, and flat circus settings. The tension between subject matter and execution doomed the series. Evel Knievel's real-life stunts gripped kids with danger. Devlin delivered sanitized safety messages. The contrast made the show feel like a lecture, disguised as action. Audiences noticed, ratings slipped quickly, and even critics who admired Hanna-Barbera's effort to avoid slapstick violence admitted the show lacked energy. Ironically, the very constraints meant to protect young audiences also ensured they found the show boring. Controversy brewed around representation of stunts. Parent groups applauded the cautionary tone but also questioned whether depicting motorbike feats, even tamely, encouraged kids to mimic dangerous behavior. Networks responded with tighter guardrails, which only deflated the thrill further. It became a no-win scenario. Too tame for Evel Knievel fans, too edgy for watchdogs, too dull for casual viewers. Culturally, Devlin has almost vanished. Reruns were sparse, merchandise non-existent, and home media virtually absent until deep-dive collectors brought it back. Today, it's remembered mostly in trivia lists as that Evel Knievel cartoon knockoff. Its flop status is instructive. Children's entertainment can't just chase a fad. It has to capture the spirit of the phenomenon, not the shell. Devlin had the bike, the jumps, the leather suit, but none of the danger that made its inspiration legendary. And so, like a misfired stunt, it crashed quietly out of memory. Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch, 1974. What happens when a sentient Volkswagen Beetle falls in love and squares off against a motorcycle gang? That's the premise of Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch, a concept that sounds edgy but plays out as a repetitive gag loop. Wheelie, the cute car, was pitched as a family-friendly alternative to the rebellious biker culture dominating headlines. The problem? It leaned too heavily on tired stereotypes and one-note humor, alienating more viewers than it entertained. The show's conceit revolved around Wheelie constantly outwitting the Chopper Bunch, a gang of talking motorcycles that served as both comic antagonists and toothless threats. Instead of tension, each chase delivered predictable slapstick and pun-heavy dialogue. Audiences, especially older kids, found it corny. Younger children may have enjoyed the anthropomorphic designs, but the novelty wore thin in reruns. Controversy surfaced in how the show portrayed biker culture. Critics accused it of demonizing motorcyclists as cartoon thugs during a time when real-world biker gangs were already a media fixation. While sanitized, the implication still carried an uneasy cultural tone. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera was pushing out multiple series a year, and Wheelie felt like filler, a placeholder in the Saturday morning lineup rather than a marquee event. Culturally, it left almost no footprint. No toy line, no revival, barely any reruns. Collectors today view it as one of the weaker efforts from Hanna-Barbera's overextended mid-70s output. Its flop wasn't dramatic, it was passive, a failure to matter. In a decade when cartoons were competing for imagination, Wheelie felt like a half-hearted doodle. The irony? In hindsight, a darker, more satirical spin on biker versus car culture might have thrived. Instead, Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch simply rolled into obscurity, a curiosity remembered mostly by animation historians. The Addams Family, 1973 cartoon. The spooky, kooky Addams Family had already proven themselves in comics and live action. When Hanna-Barbera adapted them for animation, expectations were high. The Addams Family, 1973, retained the iconic characters Gomez, Morticia, Wednesday, Pugsley, but transplanted them into a road trip setup, traveling in a haunted camper. That change alone upset balance. The Gothic mansion, so central to their charm, vanished from the weekly backdrop. Without their atmospheric home, much of the original's humor was lost. Episodes leaned on puns, light gags, and situational misunderstandings as the Addamses encountered normal townsfolk. But the edge that made the family fascinating, their macabre joy and darkness, was dulled by Saturday morning censorship. Morticia's elegance, Gomez's eccentric passions, and Uncle Fester's creepy experiments were softened into quirky but safe antics. The result felt like the Addams Family drained of their bite. Fans who loved Charles Addams's original cartoons or the live-action sitcom found this version overly saccharine. Controversy came in subtle ways. Critics argued that by neutering the Addams' darker humor, the cartoon missed the point of the property. It wasn't offensive, it was irrelevant. Ratings dwindled, and the show disappeared after a single season. Even reruns rarely resurfaced, as later revivals and films overshadowed this forgotten chapter. Culturally, it's a telling example of how adaptation can go wrong when executives prioritize formula over essence. By trying to fit the Addamses into a Scooby-Doo-style structure, they flattened what made them unique. The family deserved ghoulish wit, they got road comedy. Today, the Addams Family, 1973, lives on as a trivia note in the franchise's long history. It flopped not by scandal, but by omission, stripping away the darkness left behind a pale shadow, quickly erased by more faithful revivals in later decades. The Super Globetrotters, 1979. By the late 70s, the Harlem Globetrotters were household names, basketball entertainers with global appeal. Hanna-Barbera had already brought them into Saturday mornings once, but lightning rarely strikes twice. Enter the Super Globetrotters, which reimagined the players as superheroes with outlandish powers. Instead of dazzling dribbles and trick shots, they now battled cartoon villains using stretching limbs, water-spouting heads, and other exaggerated abilities. The concept was bold, but it confused the core of what made the Globetrotters beloved, their athletic spectacle and showmanship. Episodes followed a formula. A villain threatens the world, the team transforms into superheroes, and slapstick defeats the antagonist. While occasionally amusing, the basketball roots were barely visible. Fans expecting trick-shot magic felt shortchanged. For kids, the strange superpowers sometimes worked as comedy, but often felt awkwardly grafted on, like the show didn't trust basketball alone to carry excitement. Critics pointed out that forcing the Globetrotters into superhero tights erased their real charm. Censorship and standards and practices also clipped the fun. Physical comedy and aggressive play had to be softened, making games and battles toothless. Without genuine danger or athletic tension, episodes felt like safe reruns of other Hanna-Barbera superhero parodies. Ratings limped, and after one short season, the show vanished into obscurity. Culturally, the Super Globetrotters is remembered as a strange detour for the franchise. The real team thrived on courts and television specials, but this animated incarnation never caught a bounce. Today, it survives only in nostalgia circles as a "what were they thinking" moment in cartoon history. A brand known for laughter and athleticism became a case study in overextension. When you strip away what makes stars shine, Even superheroes can't save you from flopping. The Robonic Stooges, 1977–78. The Three Stooges were already comedy legends by the time Hanna-Barbera revived them for animation. But in the Robonic Stooges, the slapstick trio weren't vaudeville comics anymore. They were cyborg superheroes battling crime. It was a wild reinvention that hoped to merge nostalgia with Saturday morning superhero fever. Instead, it created one of the strangest mismatches in animation history. The concept itself was jarring. Moe, Larry, and Curly Joe, recast as robots with extendable limbs and gadgetry, solved cases for a bumbling boss. While the slapstick routines remained, they clashed with the superhero setting. Episodes rarely knew whether to lean on pratfalls or parody, leaving both threads undercooked. Longtime Stooge fans, tuning in out of curiosity, found the humor watered down. Kids unfamiliar with the trio had no reason to connect, since the slapstick was already being done better elsewhere. Behind the scenes, standards and practices neutered the Stooges' trademark eye pokes and physical chaos. Without the bite of real slapstick, the trio's appeal dissolved into harmless tumbles. What remained felt like a faded copy of both superhero cartoons and Stooge comedy. Ratings failed to launch, and the show folded after one short run. Culturally, the Robonic Stooges is remembered mostly as a cautionary tale of mismatched branding. You can't simply bolt two genres together and expect magic. By trying to modernize a comedy troupe into superheroes, the show lost the very essence of both. It left almost no merchandising trail, few reruns, and little affection, even in nostalgia circles. Today, it's a curiosity more than a memory, proof that even the mightiest comedy icons can stumble when forced into the wrong costume. Partridge Family, 2200 AD, 1974. In the 1970s, networks adored taking live-action hits and spinning them into cartoons. But the Partridge Family, 2200 AD, took that trend to an extreme, catapulting the groovy singing family into a Jetsons-like future. With flying cars, space-age gadgets, and cosmic neighbors, the show stripped away what made the original sitcom work: the grounded charm of a single mom and her kids navigating music and family life. Episodes leaned on fish-out-of-water scenarios, with the Partridges adjusting to futuristic society while still performing songs. But the music was generic, the plots wafer-thin, and the futuristic gimmicks recycled from the Jetsons. Viewers who loved the live-action Partridges found this version hollow. Younger kids, meanwhile, didn't have the same affection for the family, making it hard to sustain interest. It was neither a true musical showcase nor a compelling sci-fi romp. Controversy brewed mainly in the critical response. Reviewers accused the show of being a cash grab, exploiting the Partridge brand without honoring its heart. Meanwhile, the futuristic setting was so sanitized that even slapstick felt restrained. The real-world Partridge cast had no involvement in the voices, which further distanced fans. Ratings dropped quickly, and after one short season, the show disappeared. Culturally, the Partridge Family, 2200 AD, is mostly remembered as an absurd experiment in franchising. It's cited alongside other oddities as proof that not every live-action hit should leap into animation. The show had no staying power, no reruns, no toys, and little nostalgia. Today, it survives in trivia lists as one of the strangest reboots of the decade. The lesson? Futuristic paint alone can't rescue a concept when you forget what made the original resonate. Buford and the Galloping Ghost, 1978–79. Sometimes Hanna-Barbera's formula worked like clockwork. Other times, it produced odd hybrids that barely held together. Buford and the Galloping Ghost was the latter, a mystery comedy featuring Buford, a lazy bloodhound with a sharp nose, and Nugget Nose, a ghostly cowboy guardian who disrupted every case with slapstick chaos. Together, they were supposed to bring laughs and light suspense. Instead, they brought confusion. Buford himself had potential, a sleepy hound with occasional bursts of brilliance. But paired with Nugget Nose, the stories spun into clutter. Episodes often drowned in conflicting tones, part Scooby-style mystery, part slapstick Western ghost comedy. Audiences struggled to find the hook. Younger kids may have enjoyed Nugget Nose's antics, but older viewers found him grating. Buford's charm alone couldn't save the imbalance. Censorship and broadcast pressure dulled any darker ghost themes. Haunted Western towns, outlaw villains, and spectral mischief were rendered harmless, stripping away atmosphere. Instead, plots collapsed into repetitive gags, leaving little for audiences to latch onto. Ratings sagged, and the show vanished after its brief run. Culturally, Buford and the Galloping Ghost is remembered mostly by die-hard Hanna-Barbera collectors. It never had merchandise, never resurfaced widely, and rarely appears in retrospectives, except as an example of the studio's overproduction. Its flop status reveals the danger of quantity over quality. Too many shows with half-baked hooks diluted Saturday mornings. For Buford, it meant fading into cartoon obscurity, remembered only in fleeting flashes of nostalgia reels. Motormouse and Autocat, 1970 to 1971. At the dawn of the decade, Hanna-Barbera experimented with endless chase cartoons. Motormouse and Autocat was one such attempt, a car-themed spin on the Tom and Jerry dynamic. Autocat, the feline antagonist, drove high-tech vehicles in pursuit of Motormouse, who relied on speed and wit to escape. While the premise allowed for creative car gags, the show quickly revealed its limits. Every episode was essentially a vehicular chase with slapstick interruptions, leaving little room for variety. Audiences and critics alike labeled it a pale echo of better chase duos. Unlike Tom and Jerry, where physical comedy and timing felt sharp, Motormouse and Autocat often came across as noisy but flat. The humor leaned on corny puns and predictable crashes. Children, already spoiled with more engaging options, quickly tuned out. Behind the scenes, censorship again played a role. Car crashes had to be depicted without harm, which meant action scenes felt strangely consequence-free. Instead of thrilling, they seemed weightless. By 1971, the show was pulled, overshadowed by stronger Hanna-Barbera creations. Reruns were minimal, and it quietly disappeared into the vaults. Culturally, the series has been all but forgotten. No toys, no spin-offs, no DVD sets for decades. It represents Hanna-Barbera's tendency to overproduce copycat shows, hoping one might stick. In hindsight, Motormouse and Autocat shows the thin line between homage and redundancy. Without sharp timing, emotional stakes, or character depth, even the sleekest chase becomes forgettable. For Saturday mornings, it was just another noisy blur in a crowded field, one that flopped almost instantly. Fred Flintstone and Friends, 1977 to 78. By the mid-70s, networks leaned heavily on repackaging old material to save costs. Fred Flintstone and Friends was one such attempt, an anthology block that stitched together reruns from The Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show, Goober and the Ghostchasers, Genie, and other Hanna-Barbera properties, all hosted by Fred himself. The idea was to give kids a sense of variety under a familiar face. Instead, it came across as a patchwork of underwhelming content. Fred's role as host was supposed to anchor the program, but his appearances were brief and disconnected. The segments felt recycled rather than fresh, and younger viewers didn't recognize many of the obscurer shows. For longtime Flintstones fans, the spin-off material lacked the charm of the original bedrock antics. Ratings quickly flagged the package as filler in a crowded Saturday lineup. Critics accused the program of being a lazy attempt at capitalizing on a recognizable name while offering no real innovation. There were no new stories, no standout characters, and certainly no cohesive tone. Even the Flintstones theme music was stripped of its iconic punch, further diluting the experience. As a result, the show flopped hard and disappeared within a year. Culturally, Fred Flintstone and Friends is often overlooked in Flintstone retrospectives. It left behind no merchandise, no new characters of note, and no rerun legacy. Instead, it highlighted the growing disconnect between audiences who craved fresh content and studios that churned out reconstituted reruns. For Hanna-Barbera, it was a reminder that even the most iconic character can't salvage a program built on scraps. Roland and Ratfink, 1968–71, syndicated into the 1970s. Technically born in the late 60s, Roland and Ratfink lingered into the early 1970s, often bundled into Saturday programming. A de Patie-Freleng creation, it followed the archetypal battle of good versus evil, with virtuous Roland pitted against villainous Ratfink in a series of gag-driven shorts. The problem? It lacked freshness. By the time kids encountered it in the 70s, the formula felt creaky, and the humor repetitive. Roland was a bland, good guy archetype, while Ratfink's over-the-top villainy was more shrill than funny. Without strong character quirks or clever plots, episodes collapsed into predictable slapstick. For children raised on sharper, more dynamic characters like Scooby-Doo and Josie and the Pussycats, Roland and Ratfink felt hopelessly old-fashioned. The shorts also faced the era's tightening censorship. Violence had to be softened, which undercut the physical comedy that might have elevated the material. Instead, viewers got a diluted version of a cat-and-mouse rivalry that never matched the bite of Tom and Jerry or the wit of Looney Tunes. Ratings were weak, and the series quickly became filler rather than a highlight. Culturally, Roland and Ratfink has nearly vanished. It rarely appears in nostalgia retrospectives, and only hardcore animation historians revisit it today. Its flop status lies in its irrelevance, too formulaic, too outdated, and too bland to hold attention in a decade bursting with experimentation. In hindsight, it shows how quickly kids' tastes evolve. What passed for clever in one era can feel lifeless in the next. The Beary Family, 1971–72 syndication. Walter Lantz Productions tried to replicate the success of Woody Woodpecker with a family sitcom cartoon, The Beary Family. Unfortunately, what audiences got was crude animation, tired jokes, and characters that barely resonated. Charlie Beary, the bumbling father, and Bessie, his nagging wife, embodied stale sitcom cliches. Their children, Junior and Susie, lacked spark. Rather than warmth or wit, the show relied on dull routines and clunky humor. Critics at the time panned the series harshly. Animation historian Jerry Beck once described it as ugly art, corny verbal gags, and even cornier visuals. That reputation stuck. Compared to Hanna-Barbera's slick output, the Beary Family looked cheap and uninspired. Kids tuned out quickly, and adults dismissed it as a poor man's Flintstones clone. Censorship wasn't the culprit here. Execution was. The writing lacked energy, the timing was off, and the character designs felt unappealing. Without charm or cleverness, the show couldn't compete in the bustling Saturday morning marketplace. Syndication packages kept it floating briefly in the early 70s, but by mid-decade, it had vanished completely. Culturally, the Beary Family became a symbol of Lance's declining output. Where Woody Woodpecker had flair, the Bearys had mediocrity. Today, it survives only as a curiosity for collectors and historians. Its flop status wasn't subtle, it was widely derided even in its own time. For audiences spoiled by livelier cartoons, the Beary Family was simply unbearable. Yogi's Galaxy Goof-Ups, 1978–79. By the late 70s, Yogi Bear had already enjoyed a long career, but Hanna-Barbera wasn't done trying to reinvent him. Yogi's Galaxy Goof-Ups transplanted Yogi and friends into outer space, reimagining them as clumsy intergalactic patrol officers. The idea was to blend space race excitement with slapstick comedy. The execution? A confusing muddle that alienated both old fans and new viewers. Episodes leaned on Yogi and sidekick Huckleberry Hound, bungling missions across the cosmos. While the space setting offered creative possibilities, the show fell back on stale gags and predictable pratfalls. The plots lacked stakes, and the cosmic villains were caricatures with no real menace. Viewers who had grown up with Yogi and Jellystone Park found this space-age version bewildering, even off-putting. Critics noted that the show felt like an attempt to cash in on the success of Star Wars, which had exploded in 1977. But unlike George Lucas's galaxy of myth and adventure, Yogi's outer space antics felt like parody without punch. Ratings were weak, and the show folded quickly. Even die-hard Hanna-Barbera fans rarely look back on this experiment fondly. Culturally, Galaxy Goof-Ups highlights the perils of chasing trends. By trying to warp Yogi into science fiction, the studio stripped away his core charm. The result was neither funny nor thrilling, just confusing. Today, it survives as a minor footnote in Yogi's long career, remembered more for its absurdity than its entertainment value. Tom and Jerry Comedy Show, 1975 revamp. Topping our list is a name you'd never expect to flop: Tom and Jerry. By the mid-70s, MGM and Hanna-Barbera attempted to revive the iconic duo for television under strict network guidelines. The result was the Tom and Jerry Comedy Show, a toothless version of the once anarchic cat-and-mouse rivalry. Gone were the sharp chases, the violent slapstick, and the edge that defined the originals. In their place were tame pratfalls, watered-down gags, and stories often padded with supporting characters like Droopy. The censorship clampdown was decisive. Standards and practices deemed the original Tom and Jerry shorts too violent for children, so animators stripped the duo's rivalry of its bite. Episodes became repetitive and soft, with Tom and Jerry sometimes portrayed as friends rather than enemies. Fans of the original shorts found it unrecognizable. Children used to the chaotic energy of classic reruns were bored by this neutered version. Critics panned it as a betrayal of animation's greatest chase duo. Ratings fell, and the show quietly disappeared. While Tom and Jerry themselves survived and thrived in later revivals, this mid-70s experiment is widely regarded as their low point. Culturally, it's remembered not for innovation, but for proving how censorship can smother creativity. The Tom and Jerry Comedy Show stands as the quintessential flop, a legendary property stripped of its essence. It's a cautionary tale that even the most iconic names in cartoon history can stumble when executives mistake safety for charm. And there you have it, 20 forgotten cartoons of the 1970s that launched with promise but fizzled into obscurity. Some were victims of trends, others of censorship, and many of overproduction. Which of these oddities do you remember? Subscribe now for more deep dives into TV's strangest history.